Welcome to the Dean's Roundtable podcast series with Bridget Johnson. Each month, we bring you game-changing conversations about K-12 education and leadership. Join us as top educators, field experts, and administrators share actionable strategies to transform your school community. Let's dive in.
Welcome to the Dean's Roundtable podcast. I'm Bridget Johnson, the founder of the Dean's Roundtable, a space created for student life professionals to connect, learn, share, and grow together. We are officially in 2025, and for many of you, that means setting new goals and intentions for the year ahead. For leaders in schools and nonprofits, that can mean many different things. Today, we're diving into sustainable leadership, tackling a critical challenge facing leaders in mission-driven organizations. How to create lasting impact is so important. My guest today is Danielle Pickens, who brings over 2 decades of experience in developing mid to senior level leaders and teams within K-12 public education, nonprofits, and mission-driven organizations. As an independent consultant and coach for the past 13 years, Danielle excels in crafting practical, sustainable, and talent development strategies that yield exceptional organizational results without individual burnout. She's been helping organizations transform their approach to leadership, proving that you don't have to choose between organizational success and personal well being. Whether you're feeling overwhelmed in your current leadership role or building systems to support your team's growth, this conversation will give you practical strategies to work differently. Join us as we explore what sustainable leadership really looks like and how to break free from the always available trap that's burning out our best leaders. Welcome, Danielle, and thank you so much for joining us today.
Oh,
Now,
thank you
let's
so much.
get started. You're so welcome. Let's get started. Tell us a little bit about your journey.
Sure. So, have you ever had one of those friends who just takes the least traditional route to where they want to go? That is basically my journey in a nutshell. I always knew that I wanted to make a contribution in the education space since I was a summer camp counselor to lower income kids in New York City, but I never formally taught in the classroom. So, most people come into education through that route. And while I love kids, systems, people, and scale have always really been my jam. So I started my career in management consulting, learning how to manage change. And when I moved into the education space, I knew that HR, talent, human resources was really going to be for me because you can't have great schools without great teachers and leaders. So I spent almost a decade in the New York City Department of Education learning everything that I could about, how do you manage systems and people?
Mm,
Um, and I was managing a team of 50. I was knocking it out of the park. And then I had my first child. And I kind of came up against the limits of people and policy. And
sure.
to be honest, my own leadership style.
Mm,
Um, Up until that point, I was pretty willing to do whatever it took to get my work done. I was working late. I was working on weekends. I was always jumping in with my team when they needed help because, we were always understaffed, always asked to do more with less. Um,
sure.
but with this new tiny human, I had really different priorities. So I was leaving the house now before he woke up and coming home to do bath and books and bottle and bed. And it just wasn't how I wanted to parent. And honestly, I didn't really feel great about my work either. Um,
Mm,
but I wanted to keep doing it. I wanted to keep contributing. So I pioneered in a huge bureaucracy a 3 day a week part time schedule. Um,
mm,
and it worked for 2 years.
okay.
I loved it. And I got pretty resentful though that I was doing what was essentially a full time job in 3 days and
In
getting
3
paid
days.
40% less. Um, and so, as I was looking to accelerate my career, I spoke with a bunch of people, and one person pretty frankly said to me, "Hey, you know what? You're doing great, but no one will take you seriously and no one will promote you unless you come back full time." And that was kind
Mm,
of when I knew. I was like, this route of how you climb the ladder in an organization isn't going to work for me. So I went back to school. I got my master's degree with a toddler in tow.
mm,
And once I graduated, I had an old boss from New York City who said, I'm starting up a nonprofit. And I had shared my concerns with her. And she said, I am willing to let you work remotely, to work whatever hours you want to work, as long as the work gets done. And that was it for me. So that was 2011. And so for the last 14 years, I have been supporting leaders in education in the same way I was doing in New York City, but in
Mm,
a much more flexible way, in a much more
okay.
way that felt much more sustainable to me. Over that time, I've really come to realize that the way people are working and leading, particularly in the ed space and nonprofits, just isn't sustainable for themselves or for the work to last. So that's what I do now. I'm all about helping mission driven organizations develop their leaders so that they can make more impact in a sustainable way with less burnout.
Wonderful. So, Danielle, you talked about this idea of good leaders always being available. Why is that such a huge problem?
Yeah. So when we are always available to our teams, we cause a couple of problems. The first is for ourselves. One, it makes us the bottleneck and it implies that we don't trust our team, right? Like if
Mm,
you have to come to me for every decision that you need to make, I'm not one giving you the skills to figure out like how do I do this on my own? And I am making it sort of always my problem. And as a good leader, you need to empower your people. So you don't want to be the bottleneck. You want to show your team that you trust them and give them some autonomy to make decisions. Now, as if it's the biggest decision ever, like maybe not, but you do want to make sure that your team has the knowledge of when can I make this decision without
mm.
leadership? Otherwise, things just move way too slowly, to be perfectly
No,
honest.
I agree with that 100%. And it's really hard, especially, leaders in education and nonprofit are really drawn to the work because of their deep personal commitment to the mission. But how do you help people set boundaries without feeling like they're compromising their values, right? They say, like, you want to pull back, but you're like, oh, if I'm not there for every kind of moment, it feels like I don't care. And I really do care.
This is a huge issue in the nonprofit and the education space, right? Like, I show my commitment to the cause by always being there for you. And
Mm-hmm.
think about when you have your best insights. It's not generally when you're sitting at your computer, it's when you take a moment to rest, when you give your brain some downtime. So, in some ways, that's another problem with being always available. You aren't going to have the insights from just being out in the world and letting your
Yeah.
brain think about things in a different way. We never have good insights when we're just like hunched over our computer. I have my best in the bathroom and the shower, to be perfectly
Oh, the
honest.
shower is my favorite, and then I'm like, "Oh, wait, what was that?" Because I can't write in the shower, right? And so I need to figure out some sort of method to capture my, most, like, important and I would say creative thoughts that always happen to me in the shower. I promise you, even yesterday, I'm like, "Ah, shoot," and,
Yes.
then I step out of the shower and it's like it's all gone. It's like, "Poof."
Well, a
So
friend and I talked about, you can get a whiteboard for your shower, and we have talked about that. So, just one thing to think about. But,
uh,
just going back to your original question about why is being always available not great for
mhm,
leaders? Um, I think it's also bad for your team in that it creates a dependency that's not necessary. And they will never learn, right? Like, imagine if you just kept giving your students all of the answers, right? And not
right.
letting them have some productive struggle. That is not good teaching. If I just say 2 plus 2 is 4, like, okay, you might remember that. But if I give you some manipulatives and say, okay, like we have these 2 blocks over here and another two over here, what do we have now if we put them together, if we take them apart? You need to let people have some productive struggle in the education space, and it's the same when you're working with a team. You need to allow them the time to process things on their own and not always be dependent on you to give them the answers.
Absolutely, but I don't think we train leaders in that way. And so talk about how we train leaders now and kind of what we can do differently.
Yes. Well, one, we should train leaders, right?
Well,
I
fair enough. Yeah.
I think, like the first problem that we likely have in the ed space and nonprofits is we put so much energy into our programs that we don't actually think about how do we develop the people. So we're often not even developing
Mm,
folks, and we expect individuals to magically know how to do something. It was interesting. I was on the phone with a leader yesterday, and she said, I can't expect you to do something I haven't taught you how to do. And I thought that was so important, but we often ask teachers to step into the role of principal with very little training, or
yep.
to be frank with you, training that's really more theoretical than
Uh-huh.
based in the actual practice of the work. So I think that's one way that we aren't training leaders well. We're just like not investing the time to do it. I think the second thing is we are using outdated models of leadership that don't really reflect this complex and complicated world that we live in. We're still teaching leaders that they need to have all of the answers, that there is a right answer,
Right.
rather than being skilled at asking the right questions, looking to your stakeholders to see what are the real problems that we're facing and what are some of the solutions that they might have. We're expecting the individual to be the person who knows everything.
Everything.
And that really creates profound exhaustion and burnout for people, right? If I have to be the person who is the solution finder, and solves every single problem, that's a lot to carry as an individual. And so we don't actually teach leaders how to work together in teams to create better solutions. And they just end up trapped in the cycle of, I should know how to do it. I think the other ways that we're thinking about training leaders wrong, if you will,
Mm-hmm.
is we look at training them as this kind of one-time event rather than a practice,
Yeah.
rather than a practice that happens over time. So y- you and I both know that our best leadership experiences come from having done something wrong, reflecting on it, and then making change or having someone to talk to about that. So I really
Absolutely.
think it's important to make sure that it's not like, well, you came to this training so you should know how to do everything, right? Like there needs to be a little more iteration and a cycle.
Yes, what I say, practice makes permanent, right? And so if you're not practicing those skills, if that's not a muscle that you have exercised, it's really hard to like just take that information, go back, and then now be the perfect leader, right? And so I think we do put too much pressure and stress on ourselves to be that perfect person, to not show any vulnerabilities or what people would consider weakness by not having the answers all the time or not being available all the time. And that really does take a toll on you. Absolutely. And I like the other thing you talked about, and just in terms of building a team, and the nuance there is so important, and the relationship building, because if you don't build a relationship with your team and there's not that trust there, they're not really trusting you and you're not trusting them. And so, how productive are we really being? Are we really firing on all cylinders if we are, that's where our baseline relationship is without that
Absolutely.
trust?
Absolutely. I think so much of what we are taught in traditional leadership is very transactional, and it really
Mm,
isn't how do we work with people well? How do we help improve their performance? How do we give good feedback? But also, how do we even manage up to tell our leaders and push back when our team is being asked to do too much with too little? I think that's another thing. Leadership often seems as this I lead down rather than
right.
how do I also lead up, and tell folks, this is just not feasible and realistic.
Yeah, and it's hard to tell people that when there's so much pressure around them to do the thing, to be productive, to, fill in the blank. And so we don't give space for people to be able to do that. Um, can you give an example of what working differently actually looks like for a leader?
Yeah. So I think to this point of wanting to take everything on as your own, I'll give you a really concrete example.
Okay.
I often coach leaders, and one of the leaders that I was coaching was teaching a class and finding so much, they were doing so much prep for their class and putting together all of these slides. They were teaching at the college level,
Mm-hmm.
and they felt like I need to do everything for my students to make sure that they learn it. So I'm going to put all of this information in. And I asked this person, well, what's really your purpose here in doing that? She said, well, I just want them to learn everything. And I said, do you think that they'll learn everything by you telling it to them? And she said, no. She said, actually, I'm, this is to this point again of like, I'm taking on so much myself that I'm not giving enough to other people. And she said, actually, what the students have said to me most is that they love the times when we have discussion.
Mm,
So working differently for her looked like instead of putting together 10 slides that were really rich in information, it was creating a few questions that the students could discuss together and then helping them make some meaning of that during the time. So it one required her to give up a little control and say,
mm.
I want to do this differently. But it also required her to be able to step back and say, rather than just talking at people, how do I bring them in and create a discussion? Um, and that also made her not have to spend every night creating these slides and doing all of this research. She had the expertise. So sometimes it's trusting yourself enough to say, I don't need to go and get more. I don't need to go and get more information. I need to be able to create the conditions for the people that I am in community with to do this work together. Another example I would say of working differently is we spend a lot of time in meetings.
Yes.
Just so much time in meetings. And so one of the things that I'll often share with people is that I have a whole day that is dedicated to no meetings.
Mm,
Right. And people say, like, how do you do that? How do you make that happen? I say, well, I need a day when I actually can think bigger about some of the challenges that I'm facing, that my clients are facing. And I can't do that when I'm in meetings all day.
exactly.
And I said, because when I don't have any time to think more strategically or step back and sort of look at the whole landscape of what's in front of me, I said, I end up playing whack a mole. And that's what most of our leaders are doing. They
Yep.
are playing whack a mole by not spending any time really thinking about when am I going to strategize in my week? When am I going to step back and really say, what are the most important things to be working on? And what they're often doing is allowing their emails, the phone calls, the squeaky wheels to take priority over the things that really matter.
Hmm.
So, another way of working differently is saying, how can I set aside some time? It might not be a whole day, but how can I set aside some time to really think about what's going to move the needle on the things that matter most to me? And oftentimes it's not the meetings that I'm sitting in, right? Because what do? We end up working later into the nighttime. So, how can you create, even if it's just an hour or two each week, to say, what's really most important to get done among all of the other things? And when am I going to make the time for that?
Now, you use the word control, and that is something that I really struggled with because I think, as leaders, we want to have our arms around everything. We want to make sure we're in the know about everything. We want to control all the aspects because for me personally, that just made me feel more comfortable. Like I knew what was going on, so there are no surprises. I'm not really good at surprises. And so that was a shift that I needed to make. But um, what do you think the most significant mind shift you see leaders need to make to move from burnout to sustainability?
I think one of the biggest shifts that people need to recognize is that it doesn't have to be done my way, right?
Mm.
I, I,
Ouch. Are you sure? Because I think my way's pretty good, Danielle. I like my way.
I think so many people have an outcome in mind of what they want, And the control is, and it has to be done exactly this way, right?
Exactly. Yep.
There is more than one way to get to the outcome that you're looking for. And actually, other people might have even better ways, maybe simpler ways to do it. So I think the biggest mindset shift is likely there is more than one way to do it. It doesn't have to be done my exact way. I'll give you a very personal example that I think
Okay.
a lot of people with a partner might relate to. Folding the laundry,
Oh boy.
right? I early in my marriage, and now I've been married for 20 years, my husband, seeing that there was laundry, decided to fold it. And I have a very particular way of folding towels, and he did not fold them that way.
Uh-oh.
And I refolded all of the towels,
Of course you did.
right?
They were folded wrong.
They were folded wrong. I didn't think that they were going to fit into the linen closet that way. And he stopped folding the towels after that. He just stopped. And so I think when we hold on to control, there is a hidden cost in that we have to do it then, right? We have to be the one who does it. And that puts a huge burden on us. And honestly, I have better things to do with my time than folding the towels. But if you take that into the workplace and really think about what is the hidden cost of me keeping control over this particular thing, it might mean that I don't have the time or the space to do things that are even more important. And I see this a lot when people are moving into higher levels of leadership. They
Mm,
hold on to something that really is not in their scope anymore. And it keeps the other person from growing and learning how to do it. And it keeps you from doing the things that are more important. And to this point around potential, you don't fulfill your potential when you hold on to too many of those things. So you have to learn to let go of my way is the only way to do things, right? Now, I
yeah.
don't actually care how the laundry is folded, to be perfectly honest with you, as long as it's like folded and put away so that my own brain can have a nice, clean space. Um, I think that this piece around what we control, there are hidden costs to it that we have to really be aware of. When you think about what the hidden costs were for you, Bridget, what were they?
Well, that's a really interesting question. It was just, the level of stress and the time that I would spend just trying to make sure that I had kind of everything kind of like my I's dotted and my T's crossed, for lack of a better term. And that takes time. Time away from me doing things that I'd like to do in my free time from being creative, and being able to kind of see the bigger picture and step back and like lead the team in a direction that we want to go. Time to be innovative. I didn't have time to do any of that because I was so in the weeds.
Yeah.
And the time spent cultivating the folks below me. I didn't take that into consideration because that takes time as well. Because when you do relinquish some responsibility, then you have the opportunity to have people make some mistakes and then you can kind of work through those. But if you're so worried about any little thing not being perfect, again, like you said, you lose that opportunity for professional development and growth. And so I was missing those opportunities
Yeah. I
for
mean, you end
sure.
up staying in that role and not allowing others to grow. I always tell people, the upside of you letting go of this is that someone else can learn to do it.
Exactly.
Someone
I-
else can learn to do it. And like, if you have to do everything, that is not a sustainable model.
right. And so I'm still working on the laundry piece as well as the dishwasher. So I'll get back to you if that's my 2025. We're going to do a little bit better there. But
It is,
as
it's
we
hard. And you know what?
it's really hard.
I think we've also been conditioned that mistakes are bad.
Yes.
That mistakes mean you're bad. That
That you're a
mistakes
failure, all
make
the
you a
things.
failure. And so I think that we have to move past that and say, you know what, mistakes are okay. They're part of the process.
Yeah. That's how you learn and grow, right?
That is how you learn and grow.
So we're going to shift gears just a little bit. And you've worked with both K-12 education and nonprofit sectors. What are the unique leadership challenges in these mission-driven spaces that might not exist in the corporate world Or do you think there's a difference?
I do think that there's a difference. I think in the nonprofit or the mission driven space, there are a couple of things. One is that there really is a passion about the work in mission driven spaces that makes it joyful
Mm,
and also pushes you to work so hard that I think burnout is even more prevalent.
mm,
I think the second thing that feels really different is there just really isn't as much of an investment in people. We celebrate in nonprofits and education, we really celebrate this idea that administrative overhead or central office costs should be kept as low as possible. And we all know that you need to invest in your systems to be able to scale things. And so I think the corporate world does that really well.
mm.
Whereas the resource constraints and the celebration of, not investing in any sort of
Yeah.
systemic nature makes it really, really hard to work in this space in a sustainable way. I can't tell you how many organizations I work with that are legitimately managing huge budgets, programs in an Excel spreadsheet. It is just shocking to me. There is no thought about any automation. Um, and that actually, to me, is a detriment to the sector because you cannot serve people that well when you have so many manual processes that break so frequently.
No, sure. And so you talked about kind of early warning signs. When you start working with a new leader or organization, how can you what sort of things kind of pop into your mind or are red flags for you as um, an indication that their current approach isn't sustainable outside the the manual piece you talked about automation, but what else?
Um, One is they have people who say to me, I am one person doing three jobs. I had
Mm.
one person say to me, I am doing five jobs,
Oh
right?
my
Like we
gosh.
made some cuts, we had a hiring freeze. That is one, I wouldn't even call it an early indication. That is a pretty far along
Yeah.
indication that things are heading in the wrong direction.
Mm,
Um, I often will ask to look at how people are taking time away from work. Are people taking their vacations? Are they taking leaves? Are they ending their day at 5? So I'll often ask, how late do you find yourself frequently working? If you were to have a leave on your team, how would that impact your team? There needs to be some redundancy, whether someone is taking a maternity leave, a sick leave, or just a vacation. You need to have some level of redundancy. When teams don't have that, I start to get a little bit worried because, again, so much will fall to one person and then
one
your
person.
mission becomes at risk. Um, I think other things that I worry about is when they have no plan for leadership development, right? They have no succession plan if someone were to leave, and they have no plan for how do we help people learn and grow in this organization.
Hmm.
So, those are some of the big indicators that something might not be sustainable long term.
Gotcha. And so, in your experience, how does leader burnout cascade down to affect team performance and organizational culture?
I think when leaders are burned out, it permeates everything. There's a negativity to the work.
Mm,
There is this apathy that comes through. I think when leaders are feeling really burned out, it just everyone on the team feels it. And to me, it then begins to affect others and their own performance. I say, well, if the leader can't do this, how am I supposed to do this? And that can be really harmful to your culture. So
absolutely.
that's something that I would probably share with folks is just when your leadership is not feeling like they can do this work, your whole team starts to fall apart.
Mm.
Your whole
You
team's
know, the whole leading by example. If they, they see you not taking your time off, if they see you constantly working late, there's a pressure or a stress for those who you lead to do the same thing and to mimic your behavior. And they feel like they're not kind of what's the word I'm looking for? Kind of living up to your standard if they're not doing the same things you are. So if you want, you can't tell your team to take time off if you're never taking time off. They don't feel like they can. And so being able to have um, that sort of modeling behavior is super important, I think.
Yeah, I think as leaders, we have to model it because people look at both what we do and what we say. And we can
Absolutely.
say, oh, you should take time off. But if we're not doing it, it doesn't feel safe to do that,
Hmm.
right? It doesn't feel safe. I
Not at
work
all.
with a number of leaders who have come to me and said, I'm expecting or my partner is expecting, but I don't actually feel like I can take the leave that we so generously offer. And I say to them, well, how do you think your team might see that? Do you think that they might feel comfortable? And they're like, well, my job is a little bit different. It's,
Mm.
well, people
Is it?
will take their lead from you. And if you're unable to do this and you can't model for them how to make it happen, they're likely not going to take it either, or they're not going to feel comfortable, or they're going to feel guilt about it when it should be a really happy time for you.
Absolutely. Absolutely. And so, after working with leaders across education and nonprofits for about 2 decades, what patterns have you noticed in how mission-driven organizations often sacrifice individual well-being for organizational goals?
I think we really sacrifice individual well being for organizational goals when we ask people to do more with less. I feel incredibly strongly that when we say to someone, this, taking on these extra responsibilities is only going to be temporary, and then we make it permanent because we don't have the budget or the budget is cut, we are putting the organizational goal above the individual. And then we make the fact that the individual can't do that or feels exhausted by that their
Hmm.
problem. It becomes an individual failure and not a systems failure. When we have not budgeted or staffed appropriately for the work. And that to me is a huge, huge issue is we keep asking people to do more with less and expecting them to make it work. And so to me, individuals need to start pushing back on that and saying, hey, you know what? I want to make this work. But given the resources, the time constraints, the budget constraints, the people constraints in our organizations, what would you like me to prioritize? Because if we continue to make the impossible possible, working later, um, doing things that only superhumans can do, then people will be like, actually, it can be done.
Yeah, it's like a badge of honor, right? People are like so proud they're able to do the impossible, when at the same time you're like, ah, you did the impossible. Now that's the standard.
The impossible becomes the standard, and it's just not sustainable in the long term. So, this is a hard piece for people, but you really have to begin showing folks what the costs are of what they're asking, both in terms of the people, their burnout, the fact that they're not going to stay. And you also need to show them some things just can't get done in what you're
Right.
asking, right? You need to be able to say, you have given me three different tasks, three different huge, enormous tasks. Given my own capacity and the time and hours in a day, which would you prefer that I prioritize? And which, if it has to fall off of the plate, can fall off of the plate?
Yeah, and people are afraid to do that.
People
I
are afraid
think.
to do that. They are, I think that they really are afraid to do that. But when they don't do that and they don't push back even just a little bit and say, you know what, like, hey, which is the right way to prioritize this? they end up burning themselves out and leaving. And that's not good for the organization. And so organizational leaders have to start to take notice of the turnover that is happening in their organizations
Mm.
and say, this isn't good for us either. Because every time that someone turns over, we have to spend time and money both recruiting someone new and getting them back up to speed. So, what do you want to do? Do you want to burn people out and have them leave and have to get someone new up to speed? Or do you want to try and say, what is realistic? Because I think what we're asking leaders in the education space, in the nonprofit space, is fundamentally unrealistic right now.
I agree with you 100%. So, Danielle, tell us a little bit about what you're doing now, the types of clients that you have, what you're helping them with, and how you can be helpful to others out there.
Sure. So I have three main ways that I work with organizations. One is through leadership development programming. So whether you need workshops or a full scale leadership development program created, I do that. The second is I often design team retreats.
Mm,
Do you also hear the siren?
I do.
Should we stop for a second?
Perhaps. You got to love New York City.
All right. So I do three different things with organizations. One is I do leadership development programs, whether that's workshops for them or whether that is full scale leadership development creation and design. I do team retreats. So if you have a team that needs to work in a different way and wants some help thinking about how to do that, I will often come in and design a day long retreat, a 6 month package where we are coming
Mm.
together fairly regularly with your leaders. And then I also do individual one on one coaching with leaders as well as group coaching with leaders who say, you know what, I think I need to work differently and lead differently. How can I do that? So I have a very clear, what I call the do less method that
Hmm.
really helps leaders think about how to do less, but lead better and still have more impact. So those are the
Wonderful.
ways that I try to work with organizations.
That is awesome. And I just wanted to go back to, because I don't think that teams and organizations and schools retreat enough, in my personal opinion. We don't take that time to kind of take a step back from, kind of the daily hustle and bustle, and reflect and rebuild and recharge. And I think there's so much to be said about taking a day or so, even if you can only do a half day,
Yeah.
and getting out of your normal routine, doing something differently so that you can, one, see people outside of just kind of their role and responsibility, bounce around some ideas, think about how you want to do things differently. Is what you're currently the things that you're currently doing working well? Debrief on things that have happened. That's the other thing. I feel like people don't also kind of debrief enough either. And so I really love the fact that you are helping people think about kind of doing that retreat time and taking that time away. So
Yeah.
important.
Yeah. The reflection piece is and the debriefing is so essential because sometimes people start something new and they haven't taken the time to say, well, what worked well? What would be even better next time?
Mm.
And they just rush into
Exactly.
something and they haven't learned from the mistakes of the past or even what worked well. So I always tell people that you're never starting from scratch. And so that those times of sitting down together and taking time away to do a retreat or taking time aside to do a retreat is so important that
Yep.
we forget where like what's been working well and where we want to go next.
Right.
So that's when we end up playing whack-a-mole, right? You get to
Exactly.
the end of the day and you say to yourself, what did we even do? Like, did we set out what we were trying to do? What are we trying to do? It's like you're going on a trip somewhere, but you have not said where the destination is, right? So you're just
That's
kind of
We're
meandering.
just we're just hanging out.
We're just meandering along. And we're doing some stuff along the way, but you don't actually think about where are we going? Where have we been? What resources do we have to help us get there? So the time for a retreat is always so useful, and it's leaders feel like it's hard, but once they get there, they say, you know what? I feel like this has re-energized me and also
Absolutely.
helped me figure out what I don't have to do anymore. Because if we're not going in this direction, I don't have to keep doing that.
Yep, I can abandon that completely. And so, yep, absolutely. And so, Danielle, this has been a awesome discussion. I really appreciate all of your insights. And for our audience, what are 3 things you want folks to take away from our discussion today?
Well, 3 things would be: 1, as a leader, you do not have to have all of the answers. I think 2nd, it doesn't always have to be done your way. It's okay to give up a little control and have some mistakes be made. Um, and I think the 3rd thing that I would just offer is it's really important to step back and reflect on a regular cadence.
Mm.
So, whatever that looks like for you, to step back and say, where am I now? What's working? What's not? Where do I want to head? That time invested will pay dividends so much in the coming weeks and months because it will help focus you in a way that you might not have been focusing before. So that's probably what I would say.
Awesome. Thank you so much. I'm so excited to have had you on today. I really appreciate your time. And so, as I mentioned before, there's several ways that Danielle is helpful to schools and organizations. She's got a newsletter that we'll put at the end of the podcast. But certainly reach out if you're thinking about trying to figure out some retreats and things of that nature, or would just like to kind of think about how to do things differently. Once again, thank you so much, Danielle. It's been great having you here today.
Awesome. Thanks so much for having me, Bridget. Have a wonderful new year.
Happy New Year to you as well.
Thank you for joining us for this episode of the Dean's Roundtable podcast series. If you are a student life professional looking for regular support, look no further than the Dean's Roundtable online community platform, where K-12 leaders share resources, grow their network, and get 24/7 professional support. Also, if you are looking to supercharge your professional development with like-minded student life professionals, get ready for the 2025 Dean's Roundtable Annual Conference from June 23rd to June 26th in Marlborough, Massachusetts. Registration opens on February 10th. Details about the community and conference can be found at deansroundtable.org or check the links in the description. And don't forget to subscribe wherever you get your podcasts. Today's episode was hosted by Bridget Johnson in conversation with Danielle Pickens, produced and edited by Andrick Sigmund, and music by PremiumBeat.com. For any questions, contact information can be found in the episode description. And, as always, thanks again for listening.